So by now you have watched Zimbardo's TED Talk. So let's learn some more theories about criminal behavior. The early theories of criminal behavior were biological theories that focused on body constitution, heredity, and intelligence. For example, physiognomy was the study of facial features, while phrenology was the study of bumps on the head. The book The Criminal Man by Cesare Lombroso in 1876 represented the belief that certain people are born criminal and that such individuals were throwbacks to earlier primitive stages of evolution. He described these traits as atavistic or savage-like. Here you can see some of the images he used to support his theory. He focused on unusually shaped jaws, ears, and noses, excessively long arms, an abundance of wrinkles, and what he called an ape-like appearance. This is also referred to as somatotyping, since you are classifying criminal personalities by their physiques. Lombroso's theory was a throwback to Darwin's primitive evolution theory and stages of development. As for more modern biological theories, one of the arguments has been against psychiatric medications. The argument has been that certain medications have been associated with violence, such as Paxil, Prozac, and Luvox. These theories came about because of the offender's use of certain psychiatric medications prior to committing a violent act. The most famous example was in 1999 when 18-year-old Eric Harris of Littleton, Colorado, teamed up with Dylan Klebold to commit the Columbine massacre. At the time, Eric Harris had been taking the antidepressant Luvox. Other examples include Joseph Westbecker, who killed 8 co-workers, or 14-year-old Kip Kinkle, who killed his parents and fellow high school students. He was taking Ritalin and Prozac at the time. While we tend to want to draw a causal link between the use of psychotropic medication and violence, it is very difficult to make the connection because these individuals may have personality disorders among other things, and the fact that they were prescribed medication is no surprise. One of the biggest supporters of drawing these connections is the Church of Scientology. The image at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen is actually from one of the church's centers in LA. I'm sure most of you can remember Tom Cruise's stance when he was interviewed by Matt Lauer on the Today Show. This dogmatic stance against psychiatric medications has helped to propel these theories, but there has been little research to support the link between violence and psychiatric medications. Another theory that popped up in the 1960s was the XYY super male syndrome. Researchers believed that the extra Y chromosome was responsible for increased aggressiveness, as such individuals were found to have an inordinate degree in prison populations. More recent research has indicated that these individuals have low IQ scores, learning disabilities, and difficulty adapting to stress. These factors may have been associated with aggression more than any pure aggressiveness factor of the additional Y chromosome. In addition, their low intelligence level might have been associated with being caught easier by police, and thus being in prison relatively more than those without the additional Y chromosome. Other biological theories have focused on the limbic system, which is known as the old part of the brain, as evolutionary development is closely related to emotional experience. For example, the amygdala is part of the limbic system and has been associated with responding to threats and imitating aggressive behavior. This has been discovered through animal studies that have found that when they alter the amygdala, they have been able to both increase and decrease aggression. This hypothesis was further supported by the fact that the University of Texas Tower sniper, Charles Whitman, had a large tumor pressing on his amygdala. In 1966, Charles Whitman was a student at UT and went on a shooting spree from the clock tower on campus and killed 14 people and wounded another 32. Just prior to that, he had killed his wife and mother. During the autopsy, they discovered that he had a tumor pressing on his amygdala, which they argued could have influenced his behavior. In addition to the limbic system, the prefrontal cortex has been implicated in aggressive behavior. The prefrontal cortex plays an important role in inhibiting the limbic regions involved in the generation of aggression, as it seems to evaluate effectively charged stimuli and signal other nodes, such as the hypothalamus, to initiate motor action. Studies on the prefrontal cortex have shown that damage to the area can impair decision-making and increase impulsive behavior. A fascinating real-life example of this is Phineas Gage. In 1848, Gage, who was 25 at the time, was the foreman of a crew cutting a railroad bed in Vermont. On September 13th, as he was using a tamping iron to pack explosive powder into a hole, the powder detonated. The tamping iron, which was 43 inches long, shot skyward and penetrated Gage's left cheek, ripped into his brain, and exited through his skull, landing several dozen feet away. Though blinded in his left eye, he didn't even lose consciousness and remained savvy enough to tell the doctor that day, "Here is business enough for you." Gage's initial survival would have ensured him a measure of celebrity, but his name was etched into history by observations made by John Martin Harlow, the doctor who treated him for a few months afterward. Gage's friends found him, quote, "no longer Gage," end quote. The balance between his intellectual faculties and animal propensities seemed gone. He could not stick to plans, uttered the grossest profanity, and showed little deference for his fellows. The railroad construction company that employed him, which had thought him a model foreman, refused to take him back. So Gage went on to work as a stable in New Hampshire, drove coaches in Chile, and eventually joined relatives in San Francisco, where he died in May 1860 at age 36 after a series of seizures. In time, Gage became the most famous patient in neuroscience because his case was the first to suggest a link between brain trauma and personality change. Lastly, biological theories have focused on certain neurotransmitters, specifically serotonin. This is because the neurotransmitter serotonin seems to be inversely related to violence, i.e., low levels of serotonin are associated with higher levels of violence. They have discovered this through looking at the level of serotonin in the cerebral spinal fluid in people who have a history of being violent. Researchers have also found that pharmacological interventions that augment the body's use of serotonin have been shown to reduce hostile sentiment and violent outbursts in aggressive psychiatric patients. What about heredity? Well, twin studies have been used to examine the similarities between members of identical twins and fraternal pairs, but to date, there is no sufficient research to indicate that violence is hereditary. Ethological studies have attempted to study animal behavior to get answers. They are specifically interested in finding out whether there are genetically programmed behaviors or instincts. One of the biggest researchers in this area has been Konrad Lorenz. Lorenz studied the nature of instinctive behavioral acts and used a hydraulic model to explain behavior. He proposed that human aggression evolved out of communal defense responses of our pre-human ancestors. He believed there is a universal aggressive instinct where energy spontaneously builds up in the nervous system and must be discharged. Essentially, he argued that fighting and warlike behavior in man had an inborn basis, but research has not supported this view. With regard to behavioral theories, one of the first was Dollard's frustration-aggression hypothesis in the late 1930s. Dollard proposed that frustration emerges when environmental or internal circumstances interfere with the desired goal response. Essentially, his original theory argued that frustration always results in aggression, and aggression is always a result of frustration. In 1962, Berkowitz revised the theory and stated that frustration only creates a readiness for aggression. That is, the eliciting cues in the environment determine if aggression or some other behavior will result. This model is consistent with the perception of a ticking time bomb because it argues that the individual is being primed to respond aggressively, and it is only a matter of whether the environment or external cues set them off. Similar in nature is the strain theory. Strain theories argue that aggression is a result of strain, which can take the form of frustration, anger, disappointment, fear, or depression. According to strain theories, there can be several sources of strain. The first type is the presence of negative stimuli, which can be child abuse, peer rejection, school failure, or physical punishment. The second type can be the removal of positive stimuli, such as the death of a loved one or of a parent's divorce. The third type can be the perception of inequity, such as if your friends are making more money than you or earning better grades than you. Lastly, it can be due to a failure to achieve desired goals, such as missing out on success because of a lack of educational opportunities or because of being a minority in some capacity. Strain theories also focus on the use of cognitive scripts, which are learned ways of responding that are stored in a person's memory and used as guides for behavior and social problem solving. These are neuropsychological predispositions and mood states. Social learning theories came about in the 1960s due to Bandura. These theories hold that the acquisition and maintenance of aggressive behavior are developed largely through observation, modeling, and reinforcement. For example, aggression is reinforced by family members, and then children learn to use the same aggressive or coercive tactics when dealing with others. Bandura's doll study supported his stance, as the children in the study did model aggressive behavior after the adults they watched. He argued that by observing the consequences of aggression, a child gradually acquires knowledge of rules of conduct. But Bandura believed that family members serve as the most prominent source of behavior modeling. He also maintained that television and movies provide powerful sources of behavior modeling, and consequently, their concerns about showing violence being rewarded in the media. Preliminary research has actually supported this notion, as it suggested that frequent viewers of violence tend to behave more aggressively. Lastly, we have sociological theories, which argue that a number of social factors and circumstances can contribute to the reason why a person commits a criminal act. Some of these reasons can be poverty, feelings of powerlessness due to membership of a stigmatized class, or lack of opportunity to enhance one's status. These theories used to be popular, but as more people wanted to see crime punished, many people did not want to accept that society is to blame for someone else committing a crime. In the next module, we'll continue to look at various causes of violence, such as mental disorders and substance abuse.